Okay, yesterday we were learning about not eating next to a friend of yours that's eating fleishik, you're eating milchik, because then you might come to switch things around and so on and so forth. Then we learned that it's forbidden to make a meat bread or a dairy bread, because bread is something normally eaten with parif, with milk, meat and milk. If you have a milk bread, you might come to eat the milk bread with meat. That's where we're up to now. Now it says like this: if you have a tablecloth that you ate milk on, you shouldn't eat meat on the same tablecloth. Why? Because you might have, stuff of milk on the table, now you're having meat. That's if you didn't wash the tablecloth. In other words, like this, halachically, the custom is people have milk tablecloths, dairy tablecloths, meat tablecloths. They have separate tablecloths. Now, many people will eat, let's say, dairy straight onto the table, so then they don't need a tablecloth for dairy. But for meat, you need to have a separate tablecloth. Halachically, if you take a dairy tablecloth and wash it, you can use the same tablecloth for meat. If you wash it again, technically you can use it again for milk because it's clean. There's nothing's absorbed in the tablecloth, so to speak. Nevertheless, the custom is you have dairy tablecloths and milk tablecloths and meat tablecloths and so on. Years ago, it doesn't exist today, unless if you're probably over 95. Years ago, the tradition was in all Jewish homes, by the way, that red was meat color and blue was a dairy color. That was accepted tradition. Who made it up? Nobody knows. But this was the universal acceptance was red was fleishiks, blue was milchiks. And they used to have green for parif. These are the three color schemes that they had. In fact, I remember cases years ago that a new couple got married and they bought, for meat, they bought china with blue rims, blue rim around it. And the parents almost had a heart attack. You can have a tray for home because blue is dairy and now you're going to use it for meat. It was a whole interesting discussion going on. I remember cases like this. It was mamish actually a fight. Huh?
That's what they do in the army.
What, red and blue?
Red and blue, and also the plate is red and blue.
Yeah, for meat and dairy, because then you know. But generally speaking, I tell you personally, I'm only one Rav. I get a lot of phone calls of people that have similar knives for meat and dairy. And officially, they keep this separate and this separate. But inevitably, they get mixed up. The housekeeper comes, they put them back into the room. So then they'll find they have two knives the same. They'll have two of the same knives in the dairy drawer and the meat drawer. Now what do you do? So generally speaking, people in religious homes know you don't have the same cutlery for meat and milk. You have a different pattern, you have different plates. Even if you're using, let's say, Corel, you have different colors, Corel. You have different knives, different ladles, different, different pans. You don't, because otherwise it gets mixed up and there's nothing you can do with it. But
going back to tablecloth, if during your tablecloth is milchik, can you just remove it off and eat on the table itself?
Yeah,
the tablecloth on?
That's not a problem.
Not an issue.
No, because then you're not eating on the tablecloth. Or if you have, let's say, a dairy tablecloth and you put a placemat or even a napkin or something, that doesn't rip right away. So then that's also not a problem because it's a separate tablecloth.
And if it's the same tablecloth but you only use half of it?
Oh, so now halacha says like this. What happens if it's a long tablecloth? Let's say you have a 8-foot table, okay? So then then you can have meat on one side and milk, not at the same time. Meat on one side, milk on the other side. And it's not a problem because you're not using the same part of the tablecloth for both. But in a smaller table, huh?
Cannot be at the same time?
I'm saying it could be, not at a small table.
On a big table at the same time.
A big table, it says in halacha, you could. Mi'ikar adin. Again, that's mi'ikar adin. But the minig is, like we said, you have separate tablecloths, one for meat and one for milk. Just have. Now there's another very interesting din. Sometimes you cut up, let's say Friday night, okay, you cut up challah for everybody. People are eating at the table and they take challah. You know, they want more challah, they'll take from the communal tray, they'll take challah. Now you have leftover challah after the meal. So it says in halacha, that bread cannot be eaten with dairy. Why? Because you're at a meat meal, people are taking with their hands that are not necessarily clean. You don't know what they touched. You know, especially kids, they touch 4 pieces of bread until they get to the one they take. Adults are the same way, by the way. So then it's possible that the challah became meat, and then you can't eat it with milchik. So therefore, what does halacha say to do? Halacha says you should cut a few slices that you're going to use and put them there, and then you'll have the rest of it put away. And if you need more, you'll cut more with the clean hands, with the power of a knife with clean hands. But by the way, that only applies to food that you take with your hands. Let's say you have a salad bowl, part of a salad, and you have, the spoons and the serving pieces in the salad that you put on your plate. So then the leftover salad is probably not going to be fleshik. Unless, if you're in a place where people take their dirty fork from the meat and stick it into the salad, let's say it's only the family, they'll stick it into the salad to take some more salad. So then you have another issue. Now there's another very interesting, important halacha.
It's in the bag.
Huh?
It's in the bag, like bread. It's cut in the bag.
No, if it's in the bag, it's not a problem. But no, if they open the bag to take out the dirty hands, yeah, it's a problem.
We had it in case in yeshiva. It serves for breakfast. For dinner, the extra loaves serve for fleshik at dinner, but it served a single bag of bread that was left over, so that was put on each table.
But didn't they touch it? Didn't they touch it with their hands?
You usually take it before they sit down.
Huh?
Take it before you sit down.
If they take it before, what happened? It moved? If they take it before they sit down, it's not a problem. This is not Kabbalah. Right. This is very logical. You're going to touch bread with your dirty hands, you're going to make it meat or milk or whatever, and then you can't use it.
Does the can halacha be if a person's very careful, is watching over the bread?
If he's very careful and he makes sure his hands are clean, let's say a person is eating himself, okay? And he's careful that the bread is not, again, it's not Kabbalah. So the reason is when you have people at the table, they have dirty hands and they touch the food and,
Shabbos, the Kiddush, when they put out a tray of cake, and they afterwards just serve cholent, they serve klops.
Yeah, but the cholent you're not eating with your hands. So your hands are not really fleshik.
Yeah, chicken, you also have like cold cuts as well.
So in Hanami, if people touch the cake and it's possible they touched another piece of cake, you shouldn't serve it with milchiks. It's not going to make you fleshik 6 hours, by the way. No.
No, I understand.
It's not going to make you fleshik 6 hours, but, you shouldn't. Again, it's very simple. Now there's another issue. There's a din. Is my trusted pen as an example. Let's say this is a salt shaker or a pepper shaker. Okay? Salt and pepper shaker. So now, let's say I have hot chicken soup. Okay? Now I want to add salt to the chicken soup. So I go like this and add salt to the chicken soup or pepper to the chicken soup. Now the chicken soup has steam. If it's very hot, there's steam coming up. Okay? Now the din is, if this steam comes up and touches the salt shaker, what was it? did it with a bang. Now, if you're pouring over the thing with a salt shaker and the steam is coming up, that salt shaker halachically becomes meat. The salt in the salt shaker becomes meat. The same, huh?
Not 6 hours.
No, but you can't use it for milchiks. Or I'll give you another example, especially when you have kids in the house, yeah? Kids, you're serving meat or cold cuts, yeah? And kids are taking ketchup and mustard, yeah? So kids are not careful. They pour the ketchup and the ketchup bottle is touching the cold cuts. Correct? Or the chicken nuggets, whatever, it's touching it, or the mustard.
You mean the nozzle on top touches it?
Yeah. No, we spoke before when you're outside with the bang, where you turn over a salt shaker and the steam is coming up, so then you have the fleishiks going in there. So therefore, how many people, the minig is, you have separate salt shakers for dairy and milk. Dairy and meat. You don't use the same salt shakers. Many people that are careful, and again, it depends what goes on in your house. If you have kids in your house, it's definitely preferable to have separate ketchup bottles for dairy and for meat. Because a lot of times, even if it's a nozzle, but so what? It's a sharp food. Ketchup, but mustard for sure is chodev. Ketchup, the vinegar, maybe. It's questionable if ketchup is chodev or not. But no, I'm just saying this is, again, practical things people need to be careful and aware that you have to make sure that dairy and the milk don't get mixed up. Dairy and the meat don't get mixed up.
The zayah for salt, as soon as it hits, even if it's not strong enough, doesn't have to be
If the steam comes up, yeah. If it goes into the thing, you don't know. It's a suffix of it. So you couldn't use it straight for dairy. But the old outer Yiddish minig was, you had separate salt shakers for meat and dairy. And you had some people, because it's the same logic with mustard, especially again, like we said, if you're going to serve mustard with cold cuts and the kids, they ever watch the kids, they don't look what they're doing. So it could even touch the cold cuts or whatever. Or they can have hot macaroni and cheese and they're adding ketchup and it's still hot, and they take the bottle and they touch the macaroni cheese with the bottle. It could be a shaila. I'm not saying it's the biggest shaila in the world. There are bigger shailas. But still, in Indian, so in those cases, you should have separate ketchup, mustard, whatever you use for meat and milk. It shouldn't be the same one.
If you use salt for dairy after the chicken soup,
You shouldn't use it.
if you did,
If you did, it's bottled by shishim, but whatever.
it needs to be shishin.
Yeah? Very possible it's mamish milchik.
Isn't it something, you don't know exactly how much zayah went in.
But it's a suffix deraisa. So if it's suffix deraisa, have to be machmir. No, therefore they write, some people are machmir, they bring down, people that are religious will not eat anything that was left over on the meat table for a dairy meal, and vice versa. Like we said the other week, anything in a dairy restaurant has to be treated dairy. Anything in a meat restaurant has to be treated meat unless proven differently, which is very difficult to prove. Okay. Now, another din, it says like this, one last din, we'll go to Meir. You're not supposed to cut bread that you want to use for a meat. Don't forget, halacha was written before sliced bread existed. Okay, people baked bread and they sliced it.
Best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. So now, if you want to have bread for a meat meal, and you're going to cut it with a dairy knife, but it's clean. So l'chatchila, you're not allowed to do it. Why? Because we learned the dairy knife, because of the pressure of the knife, has fattiness on the knife, and it's a dairy knife. So l'chatchila, you shouldn't. In the halacha it says even more, it's asur. You're not allowed to cut bread that you want to use for a meat meal with a dairy knife, and vice versa. Unless, what happens if you have only one knife? So what do? The halacha says you stick it into the hard ground 10 times, like we learned already, and that takes away the fattiness of dairy on the knife, and then you can use it for the dairy knife for a fleishik meal.
What happens? So let's say you have a meat knife and you have carved bread and you're cutting it on a dairy cutting board. What happens to the cutting board? Is this still
You're cutting meat.
You're cutting. You have carved bread. You have a meat knife and a dairy cutting board. So what happens to the cutting board? So let's say you're cutting it on
by a davar chodaf, it would make everything treif.
But not by the bread.
Not by something which is not sharp.